At Saratoga in 1777, he saved the revolution. Not Washington, not Congress, not the diplomats in Paris working on the French alliance. One man, on horseback, with a wound that should have ended his career and a direct order from his commanding general to stay in camp. He rode into the battle anyway. He turned the tide of the most important engagement of the entire Revolutionary War. And then he lay in the mud with a shattered leg, refusing to let the surgeons take it. His name was Benedict Arnold. And on that October afternoon in upstate New York, there was not a better combat commander in the Continental Army. 3 years later, he was sitting in Philadelphia, writing letters to British intelligence, negotiating the price for which he would hand over the most strategically important fortress in America. Not because he had been broken, not because the British had leverage over him. He made a choice, deliberate, calculated, arrived at over years of accumulating grievance. And the choice was to sell the revolution he had nearly died for 3 separate times. The question history has never fully answered is not whether Arnold was a traitor. He was. The question is how. How do you get from the man on horseback at Saratoga to the man in Philadelphia pricing the Hudson River for the British? That is what this is about. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit subscribe. Every week on Reckoning, we cover the full history behind the wars, decisions, and people that shaped the world you live in. No shortcuts, no simple villains. The complete story. And drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. A city, a country, anything at all. We read everyone, and every comment helps this channel reach more people who want history told this way. Now, back to Benedict Arnold, and the beginning of a story that most people think they know, and almost nobody knows completely. Benedict Arnold was born in 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut, into a family that had once been prominent, and by his childhood was declining. His father drank. The family money ran out. Several siblings died young. He watched his family's status erode in real time, absorbing from that experience a set of values that would define everything that came after. An obsessive concern with reputation, an acute sensitivity to disrespect, and a driving need to prove himself that his circumstances had given him no adequate arena to satisfy. He was apprenticed to an apothecary. He ran away twice to fight in the French and Indian War. He eventually established himself as a merchant and ship captain in New Haven, successful enough, respected enough, with a first wife and a growing family. When the revolution began in 1775, Arnold was 33 years old and among the first men in Connecticut to organize a militia company. He marched to Cambridge with the urgency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. He was not waiting for the chance to serve a cause in the abstract. He was waiting for the chance to distinguish himself. There is a difference, and it matters for everything that comes after. The first thing Arnold did was propose the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, which held cannon the Continental Army desperately needed. He secured a colonel's commission and marched north, only to find Ethan Allen already there with the Green Mountain Boys. They argued about command. The fort was taken. Arnold's role was minimized in the accounts that reached Congress. It was the first slight. There would be many more. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the heroism first, not as context, as foundation. Because what makes Arnold's story genuinely difficult is that the heroism was real, documented, witnessed by hundreds of men who had no reason to lie. The Quebec expedition of 1775. Arnold led roughly 1,000 men through 300 miles of Maine wilderness, rivers, swamps, forests, in the onset of a Canadian winter, to attack Quebec from the rear. Men ate their dogs, their leather cartridge pouches, their belts. Dozens died. Hundreds turned back. Arnold got there with the survivors, in conditions that should have made the expedition impossible. The assault on Quebec failed. Arnold was shot through the leg and refused to leave the field. He organized the siege that followed until he was superseded and forced to withdraw. He had lost, and yet the men who served under him came back with the specific regard that soldiers have for a commander who asks everything and gives back everything he has. Lake Champlain in 1776. Arnold commanded an improvised American naval force against a far superior British fleet. He built vessels from timber cut in the forest. He trained civilians to crew them. He forced the British to fight on unfavorable terms, lost almost every ship, and delayed the British advance long enough that they decided not to continue south that year. That delay made Saratoga possible. Then came October 1777, the battle that brought France into the war and effectively decided the Revolution. The American commander, Horatio Gates, had a plan. Sit in a fortified position and let the British attack. Defensible. Also losing. Gates and Arnold argued constantly until Gates relieved Arnold of command and confined him to camp. On October 7th, when the second battle was in its critical phase, Arnold got on his horse. His orders were to stay in camp. He had no authority over anything on that battlefield. He rode anyway. He rallied a breaking regiment. He led a charge against a British redoubt. He forced his way through the fighting with the recklessness of a man who had already decided today was an acceptable day to die. A British soldier shot his horse. The horse fell on Arnold's left leg, the same leg wounded at Quebec. The leg was shattered. The battle was decided. The British surrendered 10 days later. Saratoga produced the French alliance. The Revolution survived. Horatio Gates, who had relieved Arnold before the battle, received the official credit. He was called the Hero of the North. Arnold's name barely appeared in the account. What happened between Saratoga and the betrayal is not a sudden corruption. It is an accumulation. Each grievance was real. 5 officers junior to Arnold were promoted over his head while he was bleeding at Quebec and Lake Champlain and Saratoga. He wrote to Washington. He wrote to Congress. He received vague answers. His leg did not heal properly. He was given Philadelphia as military commander after the British evacuation, an administrative role. In Philadelphia, he moved in social circles that were partly loyalist. He spent money he did not have. He married Peggy Shippen, 18 years old, from a prominent loyalist family with direct connections to British intelligence. He was accused of using his military position for personal profit. Court-martialed. Convicted of 2 minor charges. Washington was required to issue a formal reprimand. A formal reprimand from Washington. After Saratoga. Arnold's letters from this period show a man who has arrived at a specific conclusion. The cause does not value what he has given it. The politicians who have never been shot at are rewarding themselves while men like him accumulate wounds and debts and receive in return a reprimand. His reasoning was not insane. It was wrong, but it was not insane. Sometime in 1779, Arnold made contact with British intelligence through Peggy's loyalist connections. The contact was John Andre, head of British intelligence in America. The correspondence began with general information and evolved into something specific. Arnold requested command of West Point. West Point controlled the Hudson River. The Hudson connected New York City to Canada. If Britain controlled the Hudson, the continent was cut in half, and the Revolution might not survive. Arnold's plan: weaken West Point while commanding it, then arrange for a British force to capture it. Britain would pay £10,000 if the plan succeeded, $6,000 if it failed. He secured the command. Washington, trusting him, gave him West Point in August of 1780. The defenses began deteriorating immediately. Supplies disappeared. Men were reassigned. Arnold wrote reports explaining each problem as ordinary logistical difficulty. Washington accepted the explanations. The plan was working. On September 21, 1780, Arnold met John Andre in person on the western bank of the Hudson at night. The discussions ran long. By the time Arnold handed Andre the documents, detailed plans of West Point's fortifications, troop dispositions, the arrangements he had made to weaken the defenses, dawn was approaching. Andre could not return to British lines by water. He had to travel overland, in civilian clothes with incriminating documents in his boot. 3 days later, near Tarrytown, 3 American militiamen stopped him. They searched him. They found the documents. A warning letter reached Arnold on the morning of September 25th, while Washington was expected at West Point for an inspection visit. Arnold understood immediately what it meant. He had perhaps 30 minutes. He told Peggy. He kissed his infant son. He walked out of headquarters, down to the river, got into a boat, and was rowed to the British warship Vulture waiting offshore. He never set foot on American soil again as a free man. Washington arrived at West Point to find Arnold gone, and the evidence spread across the headquarters table. He sat for a long moment and said nothing. Then, quietly, to the officers around him, "Arnold has betrayed us. Whom can we trust now?" John Andre was hanged as a spy on October 2nd, 1780. He died with extraordinary composure. His death was mourned even by the Americans who ordered it. He was 29 years old. Arnold received his British commission and £6,000, less than promised, because the plan had failed. He led British raids against American positions. In December of 1780, he burned Richmond. In September of 1781, he led a raid on New London, Connecticut, the town where he had been born and raised. He burned it. 85 Americans died in the fighting. After the Revolution, Arnold went to Britain. He was not welcomed as he had expected. British society regarded him with the specific contempt reserved for a man who betrayed his own people, useful once, but not trustworthy. He went to Canada, returned to trade, spent the rest of his life unable to settle, unable to find the place where what he had done stopped following him. He died in London in 1801, 60 years old. His wife Peggy outlived him by 2 years. Documents discovered after the Revolution suggested she had been far more involved in the plot than anyone had known, an active architect of the betrayal, not a bystander. She was never charged. History gave her a pass it did not give him. The grievances were real. The slights were documented. The men promoted over him were in several cases genuinely less deserving. The court-martial was partly political. The reprimand was humiliating by any honest measure. All of that is true. And yet, the distance between being treated unfairly and deciding to sell your country's most important fortress is not measured in injustices. The grievances explain the anger. They do not explain the leap. That leap is not fully recoverable from the historical record. We have the letters, which chart the escalation from complaint to conspiracy. We have the decisions, which trace a man moving steadily away from one set of loyalties toward another. We have the marriage, which placed him in a world where the other side was the establishment. What we do not have is the internal moment when Arnold crossed a line he could not uncross. Maybe there was no single moment. Maybe it accumulated, gradually, the weight of it building, until the decision was already made before he had consciously made it. There is a monument at Saratoga with a boot carved in stone, no name. The people who put it there could not agree on how to handle a name that means two contradictory things simultaneously. Greatest hero, worst traitor, same man, same leg. The one the surgeons wanted and he refused to give. That the revolution cost him twice, before he decided the revolution had not paid him enough for it. That is where the record ends. Not with a resolution, with a boot in stone and a question the stone cannot answer. If this story left you with something you did not have before, hit subscribe. Every week on Reckoning, we cover the full history behind the wars, decisions, and people that shaped the world you live in. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Every comment helps this channel reach more people. We read all of them. We will see you in the next one. The story of Benedict Arnold is not a story about evil. Evil is simple. Evil does not need an explanation. What makes Arnold difficult? What makes historians argue about him 2.5 centuries later is that he was not simple. He was a man who gave extraordinary things to a cause and received in return treatment that fell short of what he had earned. He responded to that treatment in ways that were understandable and then in ways that were not, crossing thresholds incrementally until he had crossed one that changed everything. The Continental Army he served understood this in its way. The men who fought beside him at Quebec and Lake Champlain and Saratoga did not find it easy to hate him cleanly. They were angry. The betrayal was real and the damage was real. The potential damage, had the plan succeeded, was catastrophic. But they had been under fire with him. They knew what he was capable of. Washington never quite resolved his feelings about Arnold either. His letters from the period following the betrayal show a man genuinely shaken, not just by the strategic near disaster, but by the personal one. He had trusted Arnold. He had defended him against critics. He had given him West Point specifically because he believed Arnold deserved a significant command. The lesson Washington drew was the one he expressed at West Point on the morning he discovered the betrayal. Whom can we trust now? It is not a rhetorical question. It is the question that genuine betrayal always produces, the contamination of trust that extends beyond the individual who broke it to everyone connected to him. Every judgment made on his behalf, every vouching that turns out to have been misplaced. Arnold's physical legacy is complicated by that contamination in ways that are historically unusual. His name was removed from the monuments at Saratoga. His military records were altered to minimize his contributions. The official history of the revolution was written around him rather than including him, producing accounts that are accurate in their details and systematically misleading in their overall picture. He was not at the Battle of Saratoga in the version of history that was constructed afterward. He was there, ordered to stay in camp, disobeyed those orders, rode into the decisive engagement of the most important battle of the war, and turned it. The boot at Saratoga is what remains of the accommodation that history eventually made, acknowledging the leg without acknowledging the man. It is an honest monument in its way because it does not pretend the contribution did not happen. It simply declines to name the contributor. Whether that is the right resolution to an impossible situation is a question each person who visits the site has to answer for themselves. Benedict Arnold saved the revolution and betrayed it. He did both completely. He held nothing back in either direction. The same qualities that made him extraordinary on a battlefield, the refusal to accept limitations, the willingness to ride into situations that logic said were untenable, the absolute commitment to his own judgment about what was necessary, are visible in both the heroism and the betrayal. He was not two different people. He was one person, all the way through. That is the hardest thing about him. And the thing that makes the question of whom we can trust, the question Washington asked that morning at West Point, harder to answer than it looks. There is one more detail worth sitting with before we close. When Arnold escaped to the Vulture on the morning of September 25th, he left behind not just his command and his country. He left behind his wife and his infant son, knowing that Washington would arrive within hours, knowing that Peggy would be questioned, knowing that everything would come apart in the space of a morning. Peggy performed a breakdown so convincing that Washington and his staff were moved to sympathy rather than suspicion. She was hysterical. She was incoherent. She clutched her baby and could not be calmed. The officers present, including Alexander Hamilton, who was not easily deceived, concluded that she was an innocent victim of her husband's treachery, not a participant in it. She was allowed to leave West Point and travel to her family in Philadelphia. She was never questioned seriously. She was never charged. What the documents recovered years later showed was a woman who had been in contact with John Andre long before her marriage to Arnold, who had maintained that contact through the period of the conspiracy, and who had been, by some accounts, the initiator of the scheme rather than its passive supporter. Her emotional display on the morning of September 25th may have been the finest performance of the entire operation. If that is true, she was never held accountable for it. Her husband's name became synonymous with betrayal. Her name was forgotten. History is not always fair in what it remembers and what it does not. The boot at Saratoga stands for a man whose heroism it cannot name. The woman who may have helped design the betrayal has no monument at all. Not because she was innocent, but because the question was never fully asked. Benedict Arnold died in 1801. Peggy died in 1804. Their children lived ordinary lives in Britain, carrying a name that opened no doors and closed most of them. The leg that Arnold refused to give the surgeons at Quebec and Saratoga outlasted everything else. The reputation, the command, the cause, the country he had served and sold. It was with him until the end, walking unevenly, a permanent record of what the revolution had cost him before he decided to collect. What it was worth, what any of it was worth, is not a question the record answers. It is a question you carry out of the story with you. The revolution survived. Arnold did not, in any meaningful sense. The country he helped create and then tried to destroy is still here. The man is 200 years in the ground, and his name is still the one Americans reach for when they need a word for what he did. Traitor. Just the one word. No boot to soften it.